Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fireside, Strategic News Service's monthly virtual intelligence session, where CEOs and innovators come to learn from experts at the top of their field. I'm Barrett Anderson, the COO of SNS and your host for today, and we're talking this month about hydrogen as an energy currency of the future with Dr. Jerry Woodall and Calum R.I. Chisholm. The format for today, we'll have 2 interviews, each of which will have 15 minutes of Q&A time afterwards. And those 2 interviews will be followed by 2 breakout sessions where you'll have a chance to speak with our speakers and each other about what you've just heard and kind of debrief a bit. We will also have an optional 30-minute social time at 4:30. So we will end the show at 4:30, but if you'd like to stick around and continue to nerd out with your fellow SNS members and Fireside attendees, you are welcome to. We will keep the room open and the SNS staff will be there. So on one note, which is this is our last Fireside of the year. It's been a great year of Firesides. We've had some incredible speakers, 1 a month, 2 speakers a month, 1 session a month for the last year. And it has really been a remarkable way, I think, for our community to stay in touch and to keep learning from each other during a year when it was really hard to get together in person. So thank you to everyone who has been a part of this, who has spoken at an event, one of our events this year, who has attended one of our events or many of our events. I know there are a lot of you out there. We really appreciate your attention and support and great ideas. And it's been a fantastic time with you in these monthly sessions. Part of the reason that this is our last Fireside of the year is because November 1st through 5th, we are bringing back Fire 2021. So we will have Fire virtually this year. Because of our international audience and our speakers, we thought it was best to stay virtual for at least this year. We hope to be back in person again next year. Our theme this year will be technology driving a better future, because we know we have all had a rough year in many ways, and we are going to focus primarily this year on the ways that technology is making our world better and the potential for improvement in that space. So if you're not familiar with SNS before, if this is your first Fireside event, we were started in 1995, and the Strategic News Service's Global Report is the world's most reliable source of advanced information at the intersection of technology and the global economy. We are read by all kinds of folks across the tech and science space, including Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and Elon Musk. And 18 years ago, we started a conference that brings together 200 of those people every year. That is Fire, which I just mentioned to you is happening in November. So these Firesides are free to members. Fire itself will not be free to members, but if you do register for Fire, there will be 2 registration levels. You will become an SNS member as a part of that package. We also offer our members a private social network called Fire HQ. So if you are an SNS member, you can join Fire HQ and stay in touch with everyone in our membership throughout the year, not just at these events, not just at Fire, but you can message people. You can, if you're traveling, you can say, hey, I'm going to Seattle, or I'm going to Dublin, or I'm going to Berlin. I wonder which Fire members are, or which SNS members are there, and figure that out and message them and see if they'd like to meet up or work on specific projects. It's an incredible resource, and I hope you all will use it. I want to take a minute to thank our event partners, without whom we would not be able to put on these incredible conversations. First, I would like to thank Pattern Computer, which is now in its 5th round of testing 2 separate cocktails for the direct treatment of triple-negative breast cancer. And it is also beginning testing on a new series of cocktails for treating ovarian cancer. They're basically slackers over there, sitting around twiddling their thumbs, and they also just announced the world's most accurate and rapid testing device for COVID-19. So they're a little busy. I would also like to thank our alliance partners who help us get the word out about Fireside events. Keiretsu Forum, the world's largest angel investor network, as well as the Technology Alliance Group, which promotes, educates, and advocates for technology businesses in North Washington State. We are also always open to new partnerships. If you would like to participate in Fireside in some way, or you have an idea for Fireside that you want to see come to fruition in 2022, which is when we'll be returning with these programs, please reach out to me. and let me know. My email is Berit, B-E-R-I-T, @stratnews.com. This program is being recorded, and our 2 key interviews and Q&A sessions are on the record. So anything the speakers say during those sessions, if you are a member of the press, you may quote them on those things. The breakout sessions are off the record. So anything that someone says in any of those sessions, you may not quote them. We want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable to express themselves in those more informal conversations. One thing, so we've gotten some feedback from some of you at our last fireside event that you wanted to be more interactive in your terms of your question asking. And we are, against our better judgment, going to listen to that feedback. So if you have a question for either of our speakers during the show, all you have to do, you still need to drop the question in the chat, but I will, instead of reading your question for you, I will call on you during our Q&A period. You will need to unmute yourself and ask the question. And it is not an invitation to give your own talk. It's really, we really want to hear your questions. We want to hear your opinions. We just want to hear them in the breakout sessions. So save the long-winded statements of opinion and thought for those breakout sessions. And then if you have a specific question for the speaker, please ask them during the Q&A. I think that's it. So with that, I would like to introduce Mark Anderson, who's the CEO of SNS and the chair of Future in Review.
Thank you, Barrett. Nice to see all of you. Thanks for joining us again. Really enjoy this. I enjoy it probably more than anybody else. So it's very selfish of me to say that. And I'm going to enjoy this one particularly. There's a lot to talk about today. Before we get going, I'd like to do a few minutes about this whole issue of hydrogen as a currency. And I'm going to begin by mentioning one of my favorite guys on the planet, Elon Musk, who's I think been to fire now 4 times or 5 times. My current claim to fame, the most important thing I think that I have done so far, with plenty of room for improvement, is that Elon took me for a ride in a little red Roadster that I think was Roadster number 1. The doors hadn't even been glued properly together. He was trying to sell his cars at fire. He was selling his cars at fire. And he took me for a ride on Coronado Island, up and down. We scared some woman who didn't hear us coming because we didn't make any noise. And I believe that's the car that went on top of the spaceship into outer space. So that's my main claim to fame. And as a friend of his, I've learned a little bit about how he thinks. He actually flew up here when he was starting SpaceX to ask, I'd never met him before, to ask my opinion about should he do it. And I said, absolutely, as long as you get to put me on the board, the advisory board, which of course there wasn't one. He said, yes. So I'm mentioning all this because I have a huge amount of respect for Elon Musk as an engineer. And I know a little bit about how he makes decisions. And he has a term for this, he calls it first principles. So when he's trying to decide something about, rocketry or Tesla or whatever it is, he's looking at the deep issues of engineering and physics on a scientific level to determine the ultimate right answer, and then he gets there. And so this is an important background for the fact that he picked lithium batteries for Tesla cars. And it doesn't mean that he won't move somewhere else, but that's his religion in a way. That was his decision. And Sharon, my sister, and I were having brunch with Elon and his wife at that time. And I think that he's recently, again, broken up. So I feel sorry for Elon. He's again a single man. But I said something which for the first and only time in my friendship with Elon created a little bit of a breach. And it was over brunch. It was a breach over brunch. And what I said to him was, I know you're not in favor of fuel cells and hydrogen, but have you really taken the deep dive on this? And it was as though I had dropped a gigantic pile of dog poop into the middle of the breakfast table. Things just completely went silent. And I think he turned and started talking to his wife or something. So just so you're clear, Elon doesn't like hydrogen, as far as I can tell. And which is one of the main reasons I want to do this meeting today. Hydrogen is a good fuel. It's 3 times or more dense, energy dense compared to gasoline and diesel. It's transportable as a currency from one source of energy to be consumed somewhere else, and so on. there aren't any, as far as I know, if Elon were really honestly first principles on this, he would have picked hydrogen. He probably had other reasons for not picking it, but I will suggest, with all due respect, this may be the only time I'm aware of that he veered from his normal process in picking a technology. So maybe he made a mistake in some way or other. The main reason I was suggesting this to Elon wasn't to have a physics argument, but because I was aware of something that I don't think he knew. And that was that Japan had mounted a process secretly. You probably all remember that Japan was driving cars around California. There were fuel cell cars, not a lot of them, maybe 5 of them. And they were $1.5 million about, retail each. And my guess is that they had 2 reasons to do that. They wanted to test it in America for some reason. It was also a beautiful head fake, if you're into basketball or football, for GM, Ford, and all the other American car makers to see the complete retail failure of this pilot test. So 1.5 million is a little too much for the common man, and therefore no threat to GM or anybody else in America. Japan went from that back to Japan into stealth mode for, I think, 12 years, and intensive testing of fuel cells and hydrogen. And now, as you, I'm sure, know, they're coming back out of stealth mode and with guns blazing. So they are fully intent, as far as I can tell, on having this be a success in Japan, first of all, and then no doubt in America and elsewhere. And I would be very surprised if they aren't now the global leaders in this technology. They are amazing guys, and they're excellent at making things, and they're pretty good at keeping secrets, and they're not stupid. So my guess is we'll see a lot of Honda, Toyota, whatever, really well put together engineering jobs using a better fuel, a better energy density fuel, and a better currency of fuel. So that kind of brings up the currency question. A lot of folks have heard of this. I think we all get, even we get confused by it. I was talking to Barrett and Evan, and we're all like, now let's go through this one more time. Why is it a currency? So, it's the idea that you dig up oil and then you put oil, you pipe it in, and you refine it and you put it in your car. It was a fuel the whole time. The reason you paid for the oil well is because it was a fuel. Coal, you dig it up. The reason you pay for the coal mine is you're digging up a fuel. Well, that's not true for hydrogen. Hydrogen is a currency. You make it by using solar or nuclear or coal, and you have to separate, generally, the hydrogen from the oxygen in water. That's how you make it. So it really is a currency from the very get-go. And the fact that it happens to be a fuel is a twofer. And I think that's a good way to frame it, So it is a better fuel, and that's a threefer. But the subtle truth is, you started with it because it was a currency. So there are a lot of people who believe in hydrogen, including Rocky Mountain Institute, which we like a lot, Amy Levins and so on. There are a lot of very thoughtful people who have decided that this is the best answer. And there are a lot of reasons why fuel cells maybe are better than gasoline engines, for sure, or maybe other things. They can power electric cars, so you're not really choosing between that. You can have a really beautiful electric car powered that way. And I guess the final answer for us today is it winner take all? Maybe this gets sorted out where lithium batteries go here, iron batteries go there, other sources go there, and hydrogen goes there. That's typical. But my feeling is, if physical principles, first principles, are indeed the way to go, Elon, I hope you're listening, probably the real long-term answer is hydrogen driving electric vehicles. And with that, I'll go back to you, Barrett. I think, should I just move into our guest of honor?
Yeah, just go ahead and introduce him.
Okay. And I'm going to do what I always do, because it's not stage fright. It's really that I honor the person I'm talking with. So Jerry is an old friend of mine, long-term friend, and he has done amazing things. He's been honored extensively internationally and in the United States. I'm really happy Jerry is with us today, and he is that level of smart that is beyond smart. And so he has known since long ago that this needs to be an economic conversation as well as a technically physical one, which is why he's with us. So he's going to talk about how to get rich making cheap green hydrogen. And Jerry is the National Medal of Technology laureate and distinguished professor of ECE at University of California, Davis. I'm going to rip through this, Jerry. My apologies, but I want people to realize who you are. He earned a BS in metallurgy at MIT and a PhD in electrical engineering at Cornell. The first part of his career was spent at IBM Research Division, where he rose to the rank of IBM Fellow, IBM's highest tech honor. While at IBM, he invented and developed most of the currently important commercial high-speed electronic and photonic devices that depend on heterojunctions, including the first super bright red LEDs and foundation of all current LEDs. He also invented and developed the current embodiments of both the heterojunction bipolar transistor and the pseudomorphic high electron mobility transistor, found in all of the current 7 billion PDAs, i.e. phones, on the planet. This has enabled the current annual 35+ billion annual market for compound semiconductor materials and devices. As a result, Jerry is known as the father of heterojunction devices. He is a co-founder of Lightspin Technologies, Inc. and Compound Photonics, LLC. His university research is currently focused on large-scale energy storage to enable global-scale power-to-energy storage of solar and wind power, very high-efficiency, low-cost photovoltaic devices, high-brightness LEDs and lasers using advanced materials, and ultra-fast transistor and high-efficiency LED and laser materials and devices. He holds 95, count them, U.S. patents, and is a member of the National Academy of Engineering and is a fellow of NAI, AAAS, APS, IEEE, ECS, and AVS. 2002, President George Bush awarded him the highest U.S. government award for technology, the National Medal of Technology, for the invention and development of technologically and commercially important compound semiconductor heterojunction materials, processes, and related devices, such as light-emitting diodes, lasers, ultra-fast transistors, and solar cells. In other words, another slacker, just like the rest of us here at FIRE. So Jerry, welcome, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you. I'd like to meet that guy someday.
Yeah, me too. Now, I've mentioned the fact that you take it seriously to make business models around the science and technology inventions and engineering inventions that you've come up with. And we're, of course, interested in this today from the perspective of making hydrogen.
Right.
And the reason we've invited you, we know about what you've done already, but we want to have this shared with our team here. And we'll get into the weeds a little bit on it. But would you talk from the 200,000 foot level about why you decided to do what you did with aluminum to split water and make hydrogen, and then roughly how it works?
Okay. Actually, I didn't know until you started talking about currency. So aluminum is a great energy storage material. We use it for building. As you point out, it's used for lots of things. And so if you want to look at it as a multiplicity of applications, it is a superb currency. And with respect to hydrogen, the beautiful part of aluminum is I'm not a big believer in compressing hydrogen to 10,000 PSI and stand back. I hope the nozzle doesn't break. I like to make hydrogen on demand at 1 atmosphere, and that's what it's all about. So the whole point is the aluminum allows you to make hydrogen on demand. That's the first big point. And the second big point is I discovered a catalyst that will allow it to do so, because as you know, you can put your boat in the water up there in Washington and it will float nicely and it won't make hydrogen. So the key thing about aluminum is the world has plenty of water, 10 to the 24th exagrams of kilograms of hydrogen in the water. So we're not going to run out. So, and the other thing is, as we will hear later, if you use electrolysis and things like that, you can get around this so-called carbon storage thing. Now, what you pointed out is really exciting. And I just want to make a comment. As you know, in the thick of things, UK and even Biden is considering calling blue hydrogen green hydrogen. And all that means is to make blue hydrogen out of gray, which is what we do now most of the time, we have to sequester the carbon. So that's going to be an ongoing thing. But my view of the currency is that here is something aluminum. It comes in various grades. The cool thing is the grade that I need to make high purity hydrogen is cheap. $1.50 a kilogram. So I can take 10 kilograms of hydrogen roughly at $15, and make hydrogen, which I can sell for $1. And the reason you want to go into business is I get a reaction product called alumina, and the alumina happens to be high purity, and it's worth $20 a kilogram. That means I can give away hydrogen basically, so I can always undersell anybody out there and have a business that makes somebody some decent money. The other thing that I believe in my heart of hearts is that no one's going to get rich on hydrogen because we already have cheap fuel. I mean, people can always regress back to the cheap fuel. I mean, and we don't want to do that. On the important point is if the economics gets too fierce, then that's what will happen because the dollar is the big thing in the United States. I've discovered in the universities that dollar is more important than health and COVID because they brought all the students back to campus and now they're trying to figure out by testing and checking IDs whether they should be there or not. Give me a break. Anyway, I'm sorry to go sideways on you, but I think that's an important issue. Anyway, the bottom line is I use gallium, a metal that's got a density of about the same as iron, and it's not rare like lithium. There's plenty of it. People use it for neutron detectors. Right now, it goes into semiconductors like gallium nitride and stuff for the LED business. And the point is, it's inert. So all I got to do is run it through very rapidly, and the throughput will, even though it's expensive relatively, the throughput will allow me to keep the cost of the gallium component way down. So, and I sent you a little chart earlier. You don't have to look at it right now, but the numbers are really nice. You know, roughly speaking, I can take 9 kilograms of aluminum, make 1 kilogram of hydrogen, and sell the alumina, only 10% of what I make, for $35. And the materials cost to do that is $7. So there's profit to be made if the company is designed properly. And I will not deny it. There's got to be engineering of the vessels that will do this. I've done some of that work, but I confine most of my university work to understanding more and more about how the physics works.
So it sounds like magic. The part that I guess doesn't sound like magic is you were just smart enough to have the thing that was the byproduct of the catalysis saleable at a good price, and so you get a two for there. You get to sell the hydrogen or give it away, and you get to sell the byproducts as well.
Right.
Right.
But that's okay. The magic part, if you want to know, is that it's easy to tell. So the gallium is the secret sauce, but it's no longer a secret, of course. You knew about it when I saw you in 2007. The whole point is how you want to ask, how does it work? And the beautiful part that I've learned is that I take a piece of aluminum, and a piece of aluminum is polycrystalline. That means it's got lots of different grains and different orientations. But on every grain, there is a layer of aluminum oxide that is absolutely inert. It's a great rust. And that's why you can use aluminum. There's 100 nanometers of this stuff that allows you to use computer encasement, boats, everything else. It's all protected by a 100 nanometer layer, which doesn't degrade. That's why lithium doesn't have that. So it tends to want to explode and catch on fire. Mm-hmm. But aluminum would catch on fire if you disrupt that oxide. So what I did intellectually and practically is I found that I can take aluminum that's polycrystalline, stick it in some liquid gallium near room temperature, because gallium is a liquid, it melts in your hand, and then the gallium diffuses through the grain batteries and erupts the oxide, and away you go. Now, when you have aluminum atoms in a gallium solution, it's no longer passivated. So now, if I happen to have a couple of aluminum atoms at the surface, I bring in the water. The aluminum says, let me add it. I'm going to split the water into hydrogen gas, which is going to be cheap, and aluminum oxide, which is worth a lot of money. There's a big market for aluminum oxide. You know, Elon Musk uses aluminum oxide for separating his anodes from his cathodes in the batteries that he makes.
Really? That's it.
He loves aluminum oxide. It has to be pure to be non-conductive, right?
Sure, yeah. Interesting. Has he expressed any interest in this?
No, I haven't talked to him about it yet.
Yeah.
The reason is, to be honest with you, I didn't really think through the business model. And the reason I finally got excited about it is that I don't have to sell all the alumina that I make. I only have to sell a small fraction because it's so valuable. That means I can send the rest of the stuff I make back to the smelter and get it redone for 50 cents a kilogram.
And it still makes money? Still makes money.
Smelting. So you don't even need a dedicated smelter as long as you don't contaminate anybody else's stuff, because a little bit of the gallium sticks to the alumina, but that if you recycle it back through electrolysis, as you know, you will get the aluminum plus a little gallium back again, which is fine.
What you want?
So what we do with the stuff that we want to sell, we have to treat it a little bit more to get rid of the residual gallium, which is only 0.1%, but you need 0.1% backgrounds. The beautiful part, Mark, is that 3/9 aluminum is cheap. And even though it's 3/9, when you send it out for analysis to EAG or anybody you want to send it to, it's really 5/9 alumina. So here is something that's really cheap, and you can convert it to aluminum oxide and get hydrogen. Sumitomo, as you may know, they're the big 8,000-pound gorilla in alumina. And so they don't use that technique, but they start with aluminum, 3/9 aluminum, and they use a process which leads to a chemical called aluminum alkyl. So it's a real fancy hydroxide structure, and that's what they use. And so they determine the market generally. There are other people out there who are doing it, but they are the big guys. And so the thing about it is the process they use only makes aluminum.
Right.
And you should ask me, why the hell am I making hydrogen when I should just be making alumina, right?
Getting there. Go ahead.
You're the interviewer, but I'm going to answer the questions you're going to ask. Okay.
I was going to ask you that question. I was going to ask you in a little bit different way. I was going to say, you had a choice earlier, way back, what to attack, what problem to attack. And was hydrogen, did you pick hydrogen for a reason?
The reason I do is, I know this is corny, I want to save the planet.
Huh? That's okay.
I mean, look, I'm not interested in making money out of alumina. There's plenty of people that can make it. But since I get this hydrogen for free, why not use it and sell it?
Right. Do you think, does this scale well?
Yes.
Okay.
The only caveat is that since you can only sell a certain amount of the alumina that you make, which is about 280,000 tons a year now, but it's growing all the time. That will limit the amount of hydrogen I can throw into the marketplace. So I will not be able to do global, but I will be able to make a significant contribution to the hydrogen economy.
Wait, go back, do that again. Why not global?
Because I'm assuming someone would go into this business to get rich. It's the American way, right? Come on.
Yes.
Okay. So
actually, worldwide.
To get rich, you have to sell the alumina, and there has to be a market for the alumina, right?
I see. Okay. All right. So if we take the alumina out of the equation, we're back to it's too expensive.
Right. In other words, I can make cheap hydrogen, but I can't make an infinite amount of it.
So to make this global, we need to have better markets, bigger markets for alumina.
Right.
Is that hard to do?
I don't think so.
Okay.
It's growing at 10 or 20% annually per year.
Okay.
So it's currently about 275,000 tons annually right now.
And what's the primary use of it now?
Okay. The high purity alumina is used to encapsulate silicon chips. Did you know that?
Nope.
And it has to be high purity. You know why? Because if there's some copper in that aluminum, it diffuses into the silicon.
Right.
The automatic control unit in your airplane conks out and you die.
Yeah. So coating chips, what else? You were saying Elon uses it in his batteries.
Yeah, so Elon uses aluminum tapes made of alumina. They have to be high purity, so their conductivity is 0.
So could we do a judo move here where we use batteries to beat it with hydrogen?
Well, the beautiful part of batteries, of course, is you have to have a secondary battery to run a car. Otherwise, you have to throw it away after it's used. Primary batteries are one way, as you already know. The reason we have lithium is that it can be made into a secondary battery with a better energy density than lead. But the truth of the matter is, as you know, if you go through all the details of that, it's not being very efficient. Even the best batteries in the lab right now are running at about 200 watt hours per kilogram. Well, hell, my aluminum has got 4.4 kilowatt hours of hydrogen per kilogram, orders of magnitude higher.
Yeah. So I'm asking you again, is there a good enough market in people like Elon? Because batteries are going to be gigantic as a business. We all know that.
Right.
It's hard to get your arms around 10 years from now, how many batteries are made per year? Just a huge number. Can you finance the growth of the hydrogen economy that you're enabling by selling the alumina to those guys?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I can't think of a better place to sell it.
So my slogan used to be, when I discovered this process, the more you drink, the more you can drive. Just throw your aluminum cans back into the water, right? Now you can say the more EVs we make, the more hydrogen you can use.
There you go. I think that's fascinating. I think that's absolutely fascinating. The thing that's a competitor.
It's fun, man.
Right?
It's fun. The thing about it, when I was making LEDs, is the fact you can see what you made. You plug it in, and now you see a red dot. Makes your day. You go home, have a martini afterwards. And then when you make hydrogen this way, it's so cool. You just put the stuff in there, add water, and out comes hydrogen boiling out. It's great. And so I'm with you on aluminum as a currency. So in addition to a hydrogen transport or storage, which I'm not wild about, but it's doable, it will have to happen in transportation. And I believe trucks will have to use the reinforced carbon tubes for a while because of the amount they need to go cross country. But I could put a reactor on board. So I could actually just store aluminum rather than the hydrogen tanks. We haven't gotten that far, but that's an idea we can do.
Yeah. Would it make sense for the gas stations to have that instead of the cars?
Well, I've thought about canisters. You pull in, drop something out, and put a new one back in. The problem with that is that they have to then get into the chain. Each station has to be part of the reclamation or the alumina recycling business.
That's right.
Okay. The model I would prefer for that is to have something stationary near a hydroelectric or nuclear facility, and then have a gas lines going to various cities with a hydrogen along with a methane in there.
Yep, makes sense. Well, I want to ask you one more time. I mean, save the world, but when you compare hydrogen to, batteries, is there a simple sentence about let's say that Elon were on this call right now.
All right.
Here he is, my lower part of my screen here, and you get a chance to tell him why did he screw up by picking batteries instead of hydrogen, and why?
Well, it's hard for me to use the word screw up. The point is, he had going for him the fact that someone was able to, a long time ago, figure out how to make secondary lithium batteries. Mm-hmm. The limitation on mine is I have to recycle the alumina. Yep. Now there are plenty of aluminum air batteries out there. They're used for hearing aids and stuff like that, but you throw them away. Mm-hmm. So the answer to your question is, if I could make aluminum cheap enough to throw it away, all I'm throwing away is aluminum oxide, which is non-toxic for the planet. You can put it on the beach.
Right.
So those are a lot of caveats, Mark, and I don't like to pretend that there's I know I'm just like, I don't like to do stuff that's too futuristic.
I understand. Well, maybe he made the best practical answer, but on first principles, do you think hydrogen wins in the end?
Yes, I do. I mean, look, there's so much hydrogen out there, we don't have to worry about where it comes from. I mean, the point is, water, when did water start forming on the earth? 3 billion years ago? Well, whatever it was, that's a long, we've had it for a long time.
Yeah.
But fossil fuels are, the thing is, we took something that took millions of years to make and using it over 200 years.
Yep.
To me, that just doesn't sound right.
Sounds very human. Well, okay, so I think, Barrett, I think we're hitting our mark here for Q&A. Is that right?
Yeah.
That is correct.
Okay.
Are you ready? Are you ready for that?
I think we're ready for that. So
Okay.
I'm going to say thank you to Jerry, because this is great. I love this stuff. And hopefully people have questions.
Okay.
So the first question comes from Patrick from Silicon Valley, who says, hydrogen generation, transport, and storage, how amenable and safe? And I know this is something that Calum is going to be probably touching on as well in his conversation. So,
Well, my answer is I don't store hydrogen. I store aluminum. Right?
what's your thought on the bigger picture, though? Getting hydrogen from place
Okay.
to
Oh,
place.
you want to ask me about the big picture. So since I can't do global, and I freely admit that, I think electrolysis will have to win the day. And once we listen to our next speaker, then we may see a vehicle of getting there. But storing hydrogen is dangerous, in my opinion. So yes, we can continue on with fossil fuels, and there's plenty of it. I mean, we could for the next long period of time, we could certainly generate hydrogen. It gets cleaned up that way for processing gas, and it will be cheap. But the problem is you haven't done anything for the planet as far as lowering the pressure of the hydrocarbon or the carbon footprints that we're going to get.
Right.
All right, next question is from Stephen Honigman. Sorry, and I apologize, Patrick, I forgot to ask you to ask the question yourself. But Stephen, if you want to unmute yourself and go for it.
I was really just curious about the sort of the ratio of gallium to aluminum. How much at a molecular level do you need to saturate?
Good question. So it depends on the temperature you want to run your reactor at, okay? So the solubility of gallium at about 100 degrees C is about 4 weight%. You say, Jesus, Jerry, what are you going to do with all that? The idea is we recycle it because it doesn't get lost. So you have this big, fast recycling machine. So when you look at the throughput, you'll have done, 10 tons of kilograms of 10 tons of hydrogen, for maybe a throughput of only a kilogram of gallium. So you'll need a reservoir, and right now we use 4 nines gallium because it's easy to purify it to that level. And Alabama sells it for about $200 a kilogram, and there's plenty of it. If you go down to Perth, Australia, go outside the Alcoa plant, it's just lying in heaps. No one wants it because the market for gallium nitride diodes is whatever's out there for the compound semiconductors. It only requires about 6 vendors throughout the world to make that supply. Otherwise, everybody else will go broke if you have too many vendors out there. So it just sits there, and it's not hard to reclaim.
All right, the next question is from John Pitoti. John, you want to ask your?
I am here. Hello.
Hey, hello.
Hi.
I was at a car show. I don't remember, maybe 5 to 7 years ago, and the Honda guys were really touting their hydrogen-powered cars or vehicles, and so I was quizzing some smart people hanging around the booth, and they were saying that one of the biggest hurdles they had to hop over was the acceleration sluggishness. So that to me is a deal killer for a lot of people who are going to purchase cars. So my question is, has that been resolved? If it has not been resolved,
the use of hydrogen will be via fuel cells. I mean, it's going to be an input. So as long as you have plenty of hydrogen sticking behind you there, and you got electricity coming out, electric motors have great acceleration at 0 RPM, right? That's what makes them so great. So I don't think that will be a problem for acceleration as long as it's designed properly, because the power to the power to the road or the wheels is going to be electric motors, right? Fair enough.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Greg says, John, I drive a Honda Clarity and it is fast, smooth, and quiet. Greg Brando,
Okay.
driving a Honda hydrogen vehicle already. Okay, so Eric Jansen has a question next.
Hey, Jerry, you're a master of metallurgy and fabrication of semiconductors. Are we going to get an integrated battery as we try to drive down the power consumption of all these ICs? We're still stranded by battery power.
Yes. Well, Edison wrote an article back in 1904 saying batteries are a bad invention. So he finally acknowledged that it's good to start cars with, but I don't know, with powering cars, the energy density is just so low. And, we're down to lithium. The lithium's pretty light. So there's not, if someone could invent an aluminum secondary battery, count me in, I'll join the team, because aluminum is the third most abundant element on the planet's surface. There's lots of it.
But in semiconductors, it's not so much about mass consumption as it is about surface effects. So we don't need a lot of it. We just need to know how to use it without blowing up the thermal budgets in semiconductor production.
Well, the different batteries are a chemical source of electricity, right? But they only give off electricity because when they change their valence state, when they go from one valence state to another. That's the problem. I use chemistry where I actually change it, go from an element to an oxide. So there's no, the charge exchanges locally during the reaction, but in a battery, you have to confine that to a structure, right? And that's where the problem is, because if I want to charge things fast, you get dendritic growth of the stuff and it'll short out. What can I tell you?
Not optimistic, you aren't.
I don't see a way yet, but if I see something, I'll work on it.
Thanks, Eric. All right, next question is from Angus King. Angus, are you
here?
Here you are.
Thanks. Hey, Jerry, I was just wondering if you had a sense of the life cycle energy in and energy out. So how much energy does it go in to refine the aluminum, and what do you come out the other side?
Okay, so the aluminum, if I take aluminum from its metallic state to Al2O3, that's 8.8 kilowatt hours of liberated heat energy, okay? You don't burn yourself because the reaction's so slow. So it takes 13 kilowatt hours to get it back to its aluminum state. So the round trip efficiency is 66% or so.
Amazing. That's great.
Now, if we try to make it the aluminum green, which is a big deal right now, because some people beat me up over because they say, well, Jerry, you're using your dirty aluminum, you haven't accounted for the carbon. So, but you can do aluminum electrolysis using titanium boride electrodes. And there are, I think Gates is actually supporting a company that does that. And there are several companies in Iceland that actually use titanium boride. There you need 14 kilowatt hours because the carbon reaction, you get carbon dioxide coming out. So that gets included in lowering the energy round trip energy needed to make aluminum by electrolysis.
Great. Thank you very much.
Hey, you bet.
Garrett, I have a question for Angus King, if I might. Angus.
It's been a long time. It's great to see you.
And are you related to the Angus King in the Senate?
He's my dad.
Yeah, see, that's what I asked. That guy's a great guy. He's like my.
I'm biased, but I agree with you.
Yeah, would you tell him hi and tell him I miss talking to him? I want to talk to him. I haven't talked to him for a long time.
I sure will. I'll send him a regard.
For us with Project Inkwell. He was an amazing guy.
Yep. No, he'll be glad to hear that we spoke.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
All right. Last question is from John Anderson, who asked, is water the preferred hydrogen source? How pure does it need to be? And I'm asking the question on his behalf at his request. So.
Okay, so that's a good question. If I use four nines purity aluminum and deionized water and 4 nines gallium purity. I've had my hydrogen measured at an official government laboratory in Calum, Indiana, and it's better than 5 nines plus purity. So it's semiconductor processing grade. So it's, but that hydrogen's worth a lot of money. So we didn't talk about that model. I'm glad it was brought up, because the other way to make money, not worrying about alumina, is since high purity hydrogen is worth $100 a kilogram, then there's no problem of having to take care of selling alumina to make up the difference, to make money out of it, because the hydrogen's worth so much money. So I've thought about that. I'm answering more than you want, but it's important. What would have to, for me to do that, I would have to get in bed with Linde or Air Products and convince them to take a look at the technology seriously, because the way that model works is, and you've seen this in blogs in the paper, I'm sure, these big companies go in when there's a new semiconductor fab, because they require 5 nines hydrogen to process silicon. They get a long-term deal, and they put their plant, even though it's a fossil fuel plant, they put it on site, and they ask, you have to have a 20 or 30-year long-term contract with big penalties if you leave. So I found out about that barrier several years ago and decided if I'm going to do anything with the gas companies, that have to be direct with companies directly, I would be with the gas companies.
All right, thank you, Jerry. The next question is from Greg Brando. Greg, you want to unmute yourself?
Yep. So super interesting talk. As I mentioned, I drive a Honda Clarity, but I'm wondering, where else do you see hydrogen used in the chain of things that we need to do as humans?
Well, there's a lot of processing gas, which would probably be a waste of my time, because 2 nines hydrogen is used in processing petroleum and things like that. So as Mark had said earlier, hydrogen is a currency, but it has a variable value depending on how pure it needs to be. Okay. So my interest is in being able to use it for vehicular motion and also processing gas. And but there's lots of uses for it. So but it's graded in terms of purity, and I'm not an expert in all the areas that it's being used in right now.
All right, thanks, Jerry. So I think that is our last question, unless there's anyone else that wants to ask. We have 3 minutes left. If not, I will say thank you so much, Jerry, for sharing your expertise and your ideas. We really deeply appreciate having you here.
Thanks, Mark. I'll hang around. I want to hear what's coming next.
Yeah. Yes,
Thank
we
you,
hope you will hang around.
That was great.
So, one last question just popped in from John Anderson, who asked, where do you view catch and release storage systems, such as the metal hydride materials from Woodall?
I'm sorry, go through that one more time.
Where do you view catch and release storage systems, such as the metal hydride materials from Woodall, capital V-O-D-I-K?
I don't have a view on that. All I know is the metal hydrides don't have a very high energy density. And there are some issues about, recharging them after you use them. But I know that Toyota has now switched to lithium-ion instead of their metal hydride batteries. So I don't know where that's going right now.
All right. Thank you so much, Jerry. We really appreciate it. We hope you'll stick around for our breakout sessions later.
You bet.
It is now my delight to introduce Stephen Honigman. Stephen has been at FIRE before. He is a friend of SNS and FIRE. He is also the Senior Vice President of Electric Power, ELECTRIQ. He spent his career immersed in sustainability and technology innovation. He's been involved in both startup ventures and large enterprises, and he was also the co-founder and CEO of a company called Emergent Microgrids, which combined his experiences and interest in distributed energy resource development, storage, and software to accelerate the commercialization of scalable microgrids. that marry the resilience and value propositions of behind the meter storage with the additional value unlocked through creation of an aggregated energy storage network. So he has a large amount of experience in emerging technologies and emerging energy, and we are delighted to have him here today as our interviewer for our second session. Stephen?
All right, thank you for that. That was a fascinating discussion, Jerry and Mark. Thank you for that. It's really an honor to jump back into the fuel cell space here. And I'll start out by introducing Dr. Calum Chisholm. I won't go through a long background because I think he'll be impressive enough with what he's going to share here. He went to two slouch schools, something called Yale, and then some commuter school in LA called Caltech. So maybe you've heard of them. They're probably okay. But he is working on stuff that I find really fascinating, and I'll just introduce this discussion with him with the background I have in fuel cells, which is I was a first-year law student in the mid-90s, and I decided during a torts lecture that I really didn't want to bill clients in 6-minute intervals, and I wanted to be involved in helping save the world instead. And I walked down to the engineering quad and found an interdisciplinary degree from the Seaver Institute. It's at WashU in St. Louis, and the only caveat was I had to pick a discipline. I had to pick a technology to do a technology and human affairs analysis on. And I discovered fuel cells and I fell in love with them. And I was sure I was going to find a career in fuel cells. And now 25 years later, I might still be looking for that. I don't know, but have never had a day of professional work in fuel cells. Closest I came was to selling educational fuel cells for a little fuel cell store startup. But I really, really fell in love with this idea of taking molecules and releasing the electrical potential stored up in it. So everything that Jerry was just saying is ringing true to all the things that were sexy about it then. I got out of the fuel cell pursuit in the late 90s, early 2000s, when I really got into networking in the early .com space. And so it's been really fun to reconnect on this topic and get to know Calum a little bit and re-emerge or re-immerse myself into this topic. There's a lot that's changed and a lot that hasn't. And so with that, I guess, Barrett, if it's okay, I just want to jump into the questions for Calum, if that's okay. Calum, are you ready to go?
Live, I think. Yep.
All right, there you go. So back in the 90s, when I first got really excited about fuel cells, and even though very few people really knew what a fuel cell was, they were definitely tied to this hydrogen economy future. And then sort of the hydrogen economy as a buzzword went away. And notwithstanding the conversation on this call, it's suddenly back and hot. Do you think it's going to stick around this time? Are we on the other side of that valley, or is there going to be another ebb and flow cycle?
Well, I think we're on one side of a valley. You never know how many valleys there are, as I've learned when you're climbing the startup world. But I think probably there's three things that are really different from what was going on in the 90s. The first thing is that the fuel cell vehicles, which were just starting to go into being a vehicle and being shown, and everyone was super excited about them. Those vehicles were complete prototypes. I've talked to people that were operating them, and basically they'd say well, we'd make sure to turn them on and discharge any electrical charges in it, and then drive it for a minute and then turn it off and hope that nothing went wrong, right? And then fast forward basically 20 plus years, and now you're talking about 10,000, 11,000 vehicles now, fuel cell vehicles on the road here in California, right? So I like to point them out to my kids as we're driving on the freeway. That's a fuel cell vehicle, it's running on hydrogen. And back then, I think as Mark was saying, each car was $1 million plus, right? And now you can buy a Mirai which means I think future in Japan, from Toyota for like less than $50,000. So it's starting to become, real. And I would say that's one of the things in terms of fuel cells are real. And like you said, there's different types of fuel cells out there, but all of them are more mature. So for automotive applications, we're at the point where they can start to take off, as well as in like stationary applications. You've probably heard of Bloom Energy and other sources, but they're maturing to the point that they make sense, maybe in initial niche markets, but they're starting to make more and more sense. So that's something that consumes hydrogen. That makes that more real, the demand for hydrogen. The other thing is that the devices that can produce hydrogen, electrolyzers, they're kind of like a fuel cell run in reverse. Very much, there's certain technologies that are almost identical, but one produces electricity. That's what a fuel cell is: fuel in, air in, electricity out. And then if you do it in hydrogen production mode, that's called an electrolyzer. And then that's water in and electricity into this box, and then pure hydrogen comes bubbling out of that. All right. Those have also matured along with the fuel cells. And so the price of those will come way down, making it so that you can produce hydrogen from an electrolyzer at a reasonable cost. Basically, the estimates right now are somewhere in the range of $4 to $6 per kilogram. Okay. Now that should be compared to $1 to maybe $2 per kilogram from natural gas. So not parity yet, but it used to be like 20 bucks per kilogram, coming from these electrolyzers. And now it's within shooting distance. So that's getting people excited. And then you have the fact that those electrolyzers, if they're not using green electrons, then you're burning natural gas or, God forbid, coal somewhere to generate hydrogen on site. So that's not that very green. But now we actually have the arbitrage that green electrons are actually the cheapest thing around, right? Solar and wind are cheaper right now than building a natural gas plant, right? So you have this option here to use green electrons to produce green hydrogen, and you can do it at a cost that is ever coming down, kind of like that Moore's law thing. People see that the price of this green hydrogen continuing to come down, whereas the price of hydrogen from natural gas, which is basically what all hydrogen is made from these days, is pretty much fixed. It's not really going to go any lower. And I would say the key other thing here is that in the 90s, I was getting my PhD. I was fully aware of climate change. I think obviously so were a lot of people. And yet it was something where you'd be like, oh, wow, the parts per million of carbon dioxide are going up. Wow, it used to be 250 and now it's 385. And, and now in my lifetime, I remember thinking it's going to go past 400 sometime in the future. It's a past 400 now, right? And when I moved here to Pasadena in the mid 90s, there was no wildfires. If there was one, it was, like a crazy event that happened. And now it's basically, how bad is the fire season going to be? I hope the winds blow the other way. And the droughts, coming and now staying. And so I think that climate change, is really forcing, the world to think, how are we going to get rid of hydrocarbons? And we're talking about sequestration of carbon before the call here. And, the first thing you got to do, you got to sequester it. But if you continue to emit it into the air, then of course you only got more trouble for you. So I think that those kind of the ability of the technology to actually be there in fuel cells, as well as in the hydrogen production side, that's key. You can't drive something unless you really have a technology that's ready to scale and is commercially viable. I think the fact that now something that really wasn't around in the 90s, green electrons that are actually cheaper. That's kind of amazing, right? That was not conceivable even in the 2000s, and now it's cheaper than other electrons out there. And then finally, I think the thing that ultimately has to, drive this forward is that if we are going to try to be carbon neutral anytime in the future, we can't keep using hydrocarbons, but there are certain applications for which a fuel is just either absolutely essential or just really, really convenient, right? And, that's the case for these fuel cell vehicles, which is, you kind of, even me, I think about these automotive makers, in Japan, and I'm like, they really think that these fuel cell vehicles that have, 10,000 pounds per square inch hydrogen in them, and all this ultra pure hydrogen that they can really make that work? And I keep asking the automakers, like, why is it that you think that this is the way to go? And they're like, you can refill it in 5 minutes. You can refill it in 5 minutes. And I mean, that's always their answer, right? And it's there, and it's there. If it gets cold, you don't derate your fuel capacity, your energy content by 50%. So there are certain applications where, hydrogen just makes sense. We always think of like transportation, but it's industrial heating, for things like steel and concrete and just boiling water is, like 30% of the world's energy use, right? And it's that is going to come from hydrocarbons unless you can find an alternative fuel. And so those are the kind of places where maybe the green electrons, if they can go into a battery and come out, that's probably the best way to go because it's 90% efficiency in and out. But there are certain places where it would be really hard to electrify or cost too much, in which case we need a fuel. And as Jerry was saying, the obvious fuel is hydrogen because it's in water and you can just extract it from the water with renewable energy.
So it's a fascinating thing to hear that the biggest concern, and this may be the wrong crowd to make this reading against, but when I would talk about hydrogen in the 90s, I was the guy with the third eye on my forehead because everyone was like, hydrogen, that's a bomb, or that's the Hindenburg. And maybe Mythbusters did a good enough job dispelling those myths, but those aren't the first concerns that people come up with now who at least have heard about or know about or think about a fuel cell vehicle. Now it's this issue of like, I don't really want a 10,000 PSI canister in the back of my car. What if I'm in an accident? Because, and this ignores the fact that like, hopefully driving fundamentally is going to change. Thank you, Alon, for the work you're doing with, smart cars. But maybe that means you don't need to worry about getting rear-ended and having that little canister go pop. But there's a lot of energy that needs to go into filling that highly compressed canister. And so I wanted to just focus on that and have you split it into two topics here. One is give us a quick background on the different broad brushstrokes on the different types of fuel cells. Because I think if you've seen a fuel cell car, that has one in it. But if you're using one to provide energy at a large scale for a big building, that might not be the same kind of technology. And do they both use hydrogen? And then the flip side of that is, are there alternatives, or how does the alternative to highly compressed gaseous hydrogen in a some sort of liquid carrier come into play here? Could we actually tank the car with, like Jerry said, an aluminum can that I just finished and threw in the back? Or is it going to be that I put hydrogen into the car, or could I put some other carrier? I'm guessing it's not going to be a cryogenic form of hydrogen. Like, so where's the mix of the actual technology and the hydrogen as a vector that is the energy source for those fuel cells?
Right. Okay. So in terms of the types of hydrogen fuel cell technologies, right? A lot of people, when they think of a fuel cell, they think of hydrogen, and that's because the kind of most developed technology, the one that was really put all the effort into, especially for vehicles, they call that low temperature polymer electrolyte membrane, or low temperature PEM, or just PEM. That needs the 4 nines purity hydrogen. So that's 99.9999% pure hydrogen. And if it doesn't get really pure hydrogen, it basically fouls up and stops working. All right. That said, with tens of billions of dollars put into it since the 1950s, it works amazingly well on pure hydrogen. So you can get 100 kilowatt fuel cell generator. That's the size of your small dorm fridge, at school, right? It's kind of amazing that much power can be generated in a small device like that, and it's very efficient. All right, and it's low cost. So that's pretty amazing, but it does require that pure hydrogen, right? And because it required that pure hydrogen, even though it had all these awesome properties, people started looking at other fuel cell technologies. And basically, as you go up higher in temperature, that PEM-based system is a kind of water-based system. So let's say it's 100 degrees C and below, effectively, right? So people said, hey, if we can go hotter, we actually can deal with lower purity hydrogen. And therefore, in the late 1970s, 80s, they started developing what's called phosphoric acid fuel cells. So that's a technology that, don't worry how it works, but it works at about 160 to say 200 degrees Celsius. Warm, let's call it, right? And at those temperatures now, they could use impure hydrogen. all right? And that was a big deal because what it means is, you can take, in general, natural gas, which is fed to most places, and break the natural gas apart. Natural gas is basically methane, CH4, and you can break the hydrogen out of that CH4 molecule into hydrogen plus carbon dioxide, plus a little bit of other stuff, and you can feed it into this phosphoric acid fuel cell and it won't kill it. So those were the first fuel cell systems that were developed commercially. UTC Power did that kind of late 80s, early 90s, 200 kilowatt systems. I think one of the first ones was put in Central Park in a police station there where they couldn't get electricity in easy, right? And those worked well, but they had a liquid acid and other issues that basically kind of kept the price high, and the way that the format worked, it would be better if it was stationary, all right? In parallel, lots of people starting in like the 60s have been working on what's called solid oxide fuel cells. All right. Now, this has the advantages of the phosphoric acid, but even more. It operates typically 700 to 1,000 degrees Celsius. So now that's kind of glowing red to white hot. So that's very hot. But it can actually take natural gas right inside of it and combine it with water and give you hydrogen and electricity at a very high efficiency. So that's kind of, everyone's like, that's ultimately the simplest system, but it is operating at very high temperature. They've done a lot of great work on that, and basically they've got that system working. And again, super high efficiencies coming out of that, can eat kind of normal fuel. So now we're not talking about hydrogen at all. We don't even need to really break any molecules apart and get the hydrogen. It can just eat it up itself. But if you're operating at glowing red hot to white hot temperatures, you have 4 or 5 inches of insulation all around everything. And
you don't want to drive around with it, right?
You don't drive around with it. There are people actually working on that. They call that
wow.
metal solid oxide. It's true, yeah. So that it may come back, but then it's taking time to do that kind of thing. But they have made commercial systems then with the solid oxide, kind of the standard technology, that are megawatt sized, and some of them are smaller, but they're very efficient. And at the bigger size, integrated into microgrids and stuff, it makes economic sense. So that's kind of the standard technologies. And again, when we talk about hydrogen, what we're talking about are these low temperature technologies that work super awesome, but only with really pure hydrogen, right? So then that's what has been developed into vehicles, and it takes a lot to develop a vehicle and make it work. There are going to be other technologies that eventually come in, fuel cell technologies, other than that maybe can use other fuels directly. But for the next couple of decades, we're probably going to make that super mature before the other technologies come in. Hopefully, the one that we're working on here at SAFCell. And so that's what the demand of hydrogen is coming in there. Now, you mentioned the concept of a liquid hydrogen carrier, okay? So this is kind of where SAFCell would play, and the concept here is that, okay, to replace hydrocarbons, we're going to need a fuel. That fuel is going to be hydrogen, and it's going to be green hydrogen, hopefully, from renewable electricity plus water, and we rip the hydrogen out of the H2O out of the water, right? Now we got green hydrogen. However, much like, in the current oil and gas infrastructure, where the best places to get oil is maybe not where the demand is. So, there's oil in the Middle East, but we got to get it all over the place, right? For renewable electrons, for example, a good example is Australia is just exploding in wind and solar resources, right? Japan, on the other hand, has basically nothing in terms of renewable resources compared to its need. So Japan is entering into all sorts of agreements with Australia to basically say, like, I want your green hydrogen. And Australia's like, oh, that's great, I'll sell it to you. And then the question is, how do you get, hydrocarbon quantities of energy, right, from Australia to Japan when it's now this gas that a very light gas. Hydrogen's so light that if you make some, it'll fly right straight off the face of the planet, right? So that's why you have to compress it so much. But you might be able to make a tank that sits, in the back seat of your fuel cell vehicle. And that's one of the reasons why I haven't bought one yet, is because my kids would be sitting on top of that tank. And I believe that the Toyota has made that safe. I know they would engineer it and they wouldn't want anything to explode. And yet I still feel very uncomfortable putting my children on top of that tank. So I'm sure it's safe.
There's that psychology again, right?
That's right. This is being recorded and it's official. I know it's safe, but I'm still afraid. So, and you can't make tanker ships at 10,000 PSI. You could make it with liquefied hydrogen, but that is at negative 253 degrees Celsius. So just like 20 degrees above absolute zero. I know people are planning on this. I'm sure that there's good reasons for it. You get great energy density, but you also boil off 1 to 4% of that liquid hydrogen that you make a day in these containers, because it's boiling off and venting. And it's just so cold that it's really hard to see how you could reinvent the oil and gas industry with liquid hydrogen. So people have gone to the concept of, okay, I'm going to make hydrogen in Australia, but I have to ship it in an easy, low cost manner. And so I'm going to take the hydrogen and I'm going to smash it into another atom or molecule. All right. The easiest one that to conceive of is people are saying, I'm going to make ammonia. Ammonia is NH3. So here we take hydrogen, H2, and we take nitrogen from the air. 78% of the air is nitrogen. And we just smash them together, right, in a special Haber-Bosch reaction. And then you get ammonia. Easy peasy. We make a lot of ammonia. I think it's like 235 million metric tons a year. So we can do that. We know how to transport it by tanker ship. And then
that's mostly for the fertilizer industry?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah. Basically,
so we're good at that.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's how we have that's why we're able to feed all these people, right? I mean,
feed 8 billion people, right?
Right. Before Haber-Bosch, we were apparently scraping it off of an island off the south coast of South America, right?
Bird poop, I think, right?
Yeah, bird poop, exactly. It was about to run out.
So why can't we just make more ammonia? Why isn't that just the solution?
We can. I mean, that's the concept. We can do that. And if you have effectively very low cost or almost free renewable electricity that otherwise is just baking someplace, and you can convert those electrons cheaply, the solar into cheap electrons, you can then make green hydrogen, smash it with nitrogen, make green ammonia, and then ship that around the world. And so there are very large projects underway right now to do that from Australia, from the Middle East, everywhere that's got really awesome solar or wind. They're like, hey, how do we transport this awesome renewables? And that's one of the ways that they're doing it, and putting it into green ammonia, and then you ship it over to Japan, and Japan unloads it. And then they could burn that ammonia in turbines, or if they want it for their fuel cell vehicle fleet, they will then convert the NH3 back to nitrogen and hydrogen on site. And then the reason why I'm on this call is that our technology basically can convert something like ammonia and other simple molecules. We can feed that directly into our electrochemical component, and out comes either electricity or hydrogen, depending on what you're after. So that's a neat trick that we can do that's super efficient and very that's our kind of killer app.
And that's the SAFCell stack, right?
That is the stack, right? The electrochemical components that you stack on top of each other to get either more electricity or more hydrogen production.
And not to turn this into an advertisement for SAFCell, but is which of the fuel cell technology types that you described is the SAFCell stack?
Well, so I haven't described mine yet.
You're getting there. Okay.
In here. So we're in between the phosphoric acid technology around 160 to 200 and the solid oxide that's up like 600 or 1,000. We operate about 250 degrees Celsius. So that's the high temperature setting of your oven at home. It's hot. You definitely need to handle it with gloves. All right, you bring yourself, but it's not so hot that your stove is made out of really expensive stainless steel. And basically our stacks can use cheap standard stainless steel and aluminum in it, and polymer steel. So they look an awful lot like an automotive, engine component, and they have the ability to be produced in a kind of roll-to-roll manufacturing. So we think we can scale it, and we have low cost ultimately there. And then we can use these kind of liquid hydrogen carriers directly, which, like I said, with just $1 billion or so, we will then be able to get into vehicles and other applications that are a very high volume and low cost.
And so that's then using hydrogen, but not directly. If I'm understanding it correctly, you would tank your car instead of with 10,000 PSI of hydrogen. And by the way, just for comparison, range anxiety is one of the things, right, that always plagues EVs. I remember back when I studied this that, if 10,000 PSI, which it's amazing what hasn't changed, as I was saying earlier, like that was the number 25 years ago. It still seems to be the number. I haven't heard of any amazing breakthroughs in containment vessels. It's still, I'm sure, carbon wrapped steel cylinders. You don't want the neck to break off. But if that 10,000 PSI tank has how many kilograms of hydrogen in that to go for a typical sedan to go 300 miles?
I think we have 2 tanks and it's about 2.5 kilograms in each. So 5 kilograms.
5 kilograms. Okay.
Yep.
So now make that comparison to the liquid fuel option that you could tank. If you could tank ammonia at basically very low pressure, right? Even just room temperature.
100 PSI, but still.
100 PSI. Okay.
Yeah.
Two orders of magnitude less than the 100 PSI. No, 3 orders of magnitude less. 1, 2, 3. So that you can still tank it very quickly as a liquid fuel, and then you're using it directly.
Yeah, I mean, that is the way that we would do it. And typically what we're working on right now is actually, so like I said, the low temperature technology that uses hydrogen directly is super awesome. And, they put a lot of money and it works and it's in vehicles. So we're right now working on basically making a system that could take ammonia and add a refueling station for the hydrogen vehicle, allow you to transport and ship your very low cost to transport and store liquid hydrogen carrier like ammonia straight to the refueling station, refill the refueling station tank just like they do today with gasoline. And then on site, we would convert that to hydrogen, which they would then put into the vehicle. Yeah.
So you're not getting rid of the high compression tanking.
Not yet.
If you wanted to use the hydrogen directly.
Right. Not for the automotive industry, their price point is the lowest that you're going to get. Their size is small, their weight. So it's everything is really, really hard. So what we're starting is basically stationary applications where a lot of those limitations are not a big issue. If we want to use that liquid hydrogen carrier directly. So for example, one of the first systems we made was a remote power unit, basically to electrify oil and gas sites and stop them from venting 4 to 6 tons of methane per year to keep that site producing. And we use that directly on methanol.
Methanol is another carrier then?
Methanol is another what they call liquid hydrogen carrier. So that's basically another very simple molecule. It's CH3OH and it's a liquid and you don't have to compress it at all. So, and that's something that you could use directly as a fuel. In fact, there was a kind of big debate over, should we go methanol or should we go hydrogen back in the 90s? And then the DOE decided they like hydrogen. And so, kind of everything shifted towards that. But yeah, methanol is another carrier. Also big in Japan is basically what they call a liquid organic hydrogen carrier, LOHC. And that's basically, they like to call it green gasoline. So basically it's a cyclic carbon ring, but the key thing about it is 3 hydrogens can be forced onto it, and then 3 hydrogens can be ripped out of it reversibly. So in that case, they like that because the big oil and gas industry says, hey, I've got all these refineries, I've got all these ships, I've got all these pipelines. You're telling me I'm just gonna have to throw it all away and redo with a hydrogen infrastructure? I would rather take the green hydrogen from Australia, shove it into my green gasoline, and then transport it on the same ship that I'm using right now, and then just unload it onto the same port, into the same storage facility, into the same refinery, convert it there, and then send it along as hydrogen. So, and it turns out we can run on basically all 3 major liquid hydrogen carriers that people are really investing in right now.
So it's interesting. We get to the point now where you're at the gas station. Let's use the gas station in quotes. It's like saying when you make a videotape of something today, there's no tape involved, but I'm guessing in 30 years, we'll still say, I'm going to the gas station. Mm-hmm. And maybe you are tanking hydrogen and it's a gas, but a lot of people on this call, I think, are sort of interested in is hydrogen the future? And somehow hydrogen is involved in what you're just describing, but could you not also use that liquid hydrogen carrier that gets delivered to the gas station to generate electricity right there and recharge your car with a very high capacity? I mean, that's really the issue with batteries, is where EVs are going is they're going to stress the grid out, because if you have everyone on your block having an EV, you're not going to, the grid doesn't have the capacity from a power perspective to charge all those cars. So you can trickle charge it overnight on your 110 or even your 240. But if you are on a road trip, you're going to need to have the equivalent of a Tesla supercharger, but at every gas station, right? So is that another way of looking very comparatively of what would the competitive advantage be between those 2 options? Obviously, you might prefer the hydrogen, but if you can give us what are the 2 trade-offs there between using the delivered liquid hydrogen carrier and turn it into electricity, maybe even DC because it's right there, versus tanking the hydrogen that you have to be pure with for the for the hydrogen fuel cell vehicle instead of the EV.
Right. So that's interesting that you bring that up. That is one of for the example that you gave, it would stress the grid if everyone tried to kind of plug it in. And there's some like fleet operators that said like, well, I'm going to have to pay millions of dollars just to get this permitted. And they're like, hey, but maybe I can buy a system that can provide me that power.
Right.
On site. Yeah. So that actually is an application for fuel cells. And indeed, again, the kind of leading scalable technology is this low temperature PEM that needs the hydrogen. But people are saying like, yeah, put a tank of ammonia, put a tank of methanol here, and then we'll go into a box called a reformer that will break it apart into hydrogen plus whatever else, and then separate and purify the hydrogen and feed it to the fuel cell. And I can then power your battery car charger. So there are actually systems that people are doing exactly that. And it is a very good application. Basically, the fuel is going to be green hydrogen, right? Because you're taking the whole point here is what are we going to do with green electrons? We actually have, it's amazing that we have green electrons that are the cheapest source, right? But now we're in the trouble that like, yeah, but our economy, a large part of it runs off of fuel. So we have to convert the electron, right, into a fuel. And it's going to be hydrogen because splitting water is the way to go. The only thing that you can really do on that scale. But then, yeah, you can't transport and store that. So all these liquid hydrogen carriers, they're just an easy way to transport and store the hydrogen. If all you need is heat, you could easily burn any of these liquid hydrogen carriers on site just for heat. And then, yeah, if you wanted to electricity, then it is a possibility of running it through a fuel cell. If for some reason you're on like a microgrid, we've gotten a lot of interest in terms of our hydrogen generators, even at a much smaller scale, just to back up basically microgrids so that, yeah, you have that energy storage with a week or so that there's low light or there's a storm or whatever, because otherwise you got to put 5x the batteries in there to back up your system.
So Calum, we have,
and Stephen, I think I want to make sure we have about 10 minutes left for questions, and I want to make sure.
Good, I was about to ask. Yeah, I think we've gone over. Yeah.
So the first question is from Evan, actually. Evan, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, so Calum, you were mentioning a couple of different use cases, and I was hoping maybe you could just sort of paint a picture for everybody of what you see the market looking like in about 10 years. You mentioned steel, which I think is really interesting because we all know that's a huge one. So maybe like just a double whammy here, like can you describe the best use cases where you think it's more applicable by far and will work well compared to other forms of renewables? And also just kind of like what do you see as being, like the Japan example is really interesting to me. You're talking about infrastructure, shipping stuff back and forth. What do you see as kind of being the global situation in 10 years?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I know that I was looking it up. There's like 94 gigawatts of planned electrolyzers by 2030, right? But the installed capacity, combined installed capacity as of last year was only 200 megawatts of electrolyzers, right? So there's big plans for hydrogen, but there is a bottleneck, like in terms of if it's coming from Jerry can help us. You can start making it from aluminum, but like if it's coming from electrolyzers, there needs to be a huge ramp up before it gets into the prime time markets like steel. I mean, the amount of energy that's required for a steel plant, right? You need constant hydrogen. So right now, it's the price of hydrogen is, for a fuel cell vehicles, $12 to $16 per kilogram, and that needs to drop dramatically. They say at least below $5 per kilogram, more like $4 if you want mass adoption. Let's assume though that everyone can scale this up because they're taking advantage of the arbitrage of the green electrons, and there's the driver of climate change. Because really, there's no driver. We just keep using hydrocarbons, right? I do see that there's just going to be more and more pressure to reduce emissions, and hydrogen is going to be the option for long haul trucking. It's one of the things that you can see it just a perfect fit for, again, for heating. For industrial applications, you could basically see storing a huge tank of one of these liquid hydrogen carriers on site and then using it either directly to heat or converting it to electricity via fuel cell. I also think that there's a lot more people that want to go completely renewable, so make microgrids. And then, like I said, then basically hydrogen probably in the form of a liquid hydrogen carrier, although if you had enough space, you could just fill up tanks of hydrogen when you had extra sun, And then hydrogen is a great way to store it, you know, over multiple months, so that in the winter you can then start drawing down that hydrogen and producing electricity when your solar and batteries are pooping out. So I think those are the kind of, I think the main huge things: fuel cell vehicles, you know, heating, production of steel where you need the hydrogen to reduce stuff. Those are going to push up, and the scale is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And meanwhile, there's going to be kind of organic growth, say, of you know, smaller things like microgrids, where it just fills a niche where otherwise you can make it work, but you need a whole bunch of extra batteries, a whole bunch of extra solar, and it's great to have the hydrogen around just to store energy.
Thanks, Calum. Calum and I had a call like last week, I think, or the week before, about hydrogen and what he was going to talk about today. And he gave me probably the best understanding that I currently have of how to think about hydrogen as it fits into the broader ecosystem. So that was very helpful. Next question is from Eric Jansen. Eric? Is he still around?
Yeah,
okay.
You hear me?
Oh, yep.
So we've gotten so many toxic spills and the EPA and all kinds of ugly things from the petro industry. When you talk about hydrogen and liquid hydrogen carriers, does it have a similar toxicity risk to society and the world?
Well, okay, so the leading ones are ammonia, methanol, and then the stuff called methyl cyclohexane, which is a toluene. So those are all toxic.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly have. I would if someone was saying let's put ammonia on board a passenger vehicle, I'd be like, no, that's a bad idea.
Yeah, last time I checked, that's what railroad problems are about.
Yeah, exactly. Now that said, like I said, 235 million metric tons of ammonia are stored and shipped all over the world, and it's obviously done pretty safely in industrial settings or in agricultural. So I think it can be done. I can totally see how you could deliver it to city gate, they call that, so kind of outside the city. I do see then it becomes difficult with ammonia. I wouldn't want a tanker of ammonia being going into like kind of consumer neighborhoods and then having trouble. You'd have a lot of people running away, which is one of the reasons why I like methanol. Now, methanol, very, very flammable, but it's toxic if you drink it. But I think that it's basically pretty similar to gasoline. That said, I've been heard that methanol is a 4-letter word when it comes to a lot of people in the United States.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, so it's one of those things where you love it or you hate it. And then, like I said, these kind of green gasoline, those alternatives are really interesting. You have to capture it, right? It's you take it, you use it, and then it turns into pretty much the same volume and weight, and then you got to suck that out of your, right? So there's kind of a round trip thing you got to worry about versus ammonia just goes into nitrogen, right? And water, and then CO2 and water for methanol. But if you overcome that, then that basically is effectively gasoline. It's probably got almost all the same toxicity level. And, gasoline, we wouldn't use that now if we hadn't invented it a long time ago and kind of gotten used to it. But since it's here, I bet you could have that, permitted, and you could certainly use the same existing infrastructure, which is, I think that's really, really key. I mean, so people don't talk enough about what it would mean to build out a hydrogen, infrastructure. I think we have 47. I looked it up. 47 hydrogen stations in California, and amazing work to build those. And their price is getting lower and lower, but I think it costs $400 million to put them in. And I think the price per station, as the station gets bigger, it's getting lower, maybe $1 million. But that's compared to maybe $100,000 for a gasoline station, right? And then. Yeah.
It feels like a Mark Anderson comment, but isn't it fascinating how incumbency seems to trump innovation, unless innovation it takes the small steps they have to get around incumbency?
Yeah. We have time for one last question, so I'm going to jump to our next question, which is from Robert McClure, and he says, I'm not sure I've heard a good answer about the safety of hydrogen in vehicles. Even Calum is leery. In fact, how much different is the explosive potential versus the bombs we carry around now in the form of gasoline? This seems like a big question for consumer acceptance.
So yeah, there's the pressure question, and in that case, it is much more bomb-like than a tank of gasoline. A tank of gasoline, you're going to puncture it and it's going to leak. And then it's only the fumes that are flammable. So you have, once it has to pool and a whole bunch of vapor pressure has to get there, just like when you accidentally don't turn on your stove, right? And it flows for a while and then like, oh, I smell that. And then you light it and it goes poof. So, that's gasoline, but, hydrogen, it is a lot of pressure. However, I've seen videos and I really do trust the Japanese that they say, look, we put a piece of metal on this tank. And the tank now, by the way, Stefan, is just composite fiber resin. There's no steel left anymore.
No steel.
Right, so it's even better. And they basically put a piece of metal, and they know that metal will fail at a certain pressure. So before the tank ruptures uncontrollably, this metal thing will fail, and it has a tube that shoots it straight out the top of the vehicle. Hydrogen actually disperses really fast. So moments after you vented that 5 kilograms of hydrogen, you'd be safe. The explosion limit is better than it is with gasoline. So that said, and again, it could be irrational. It's a lot of pressure. If that tank exploded in your garage in an enclosed space, then I'm very scared. Yeah. Then it doesn't disperse very fast. It actually just mixes until it finds something.
It disperses very fast.
Yeah, well, that's right, exactly.
And
So does your home.
Calum, thank you so much. Stephen, thank you so much. It is such a delight to have you both with us. We are going to move over to breakout sessions now. I hope you both will stick around for those.